The laughter started halfway through dinner. White wine glasses caught the chandelier light as Kendra, my sister-in-law, pointed at my necklace with one perfectly manicured finger. "Is that from a clearance rack?" she asked loudly, her voice cutting through the polite conversation. The entire table turned to look. Heat crept up my neck as everyone stared at the simple silver chain around my throat. Kendra's smile was sharp and cruel. "I mean, it's cute in a discount store kind of way." More laughter rippled around the table. Drew's mother, Sharon, hid her smirk behind her wine glass. Drew's brother chuckled into his napkin. Even Drew, my own husband, avoided my eyes and said nothing. I touched the small charm hanging from the chain, my thumb brushing across the engraved logo on the back. The metal was warm from my skin. I didn't respond to Kendra's mockery. I just smiled politely and took another sip of water. They had absolutely no idea what they were looking at. My name is Ava Whitmore, and I've been the outsider in this family since the day I married into it. Drew came from old money, the kind that bought country club memberships and vacation homes. I came from a neighborhood where we were lucky if the heating worked in winter. His family made sure I never forgot the difference. They called me sweet, which was their polite way of saying weak. They thought I was lucky to have married Drew, like I'd won some kind of lottery. What they didn't know was that I'd been building something for years. Something they dismissed, ignored, and underestimated. While they were busy judging my clothes and my background, I was creating a software company from my laptop in our spare bedroom. The necklace Kendra just mocked. It had my company logo engraved on the back. The same company that was about to change everything. But I hadn't told them yet. I'd learned early on that this family didn't respond well to ambition from people they considered beneath them. So I stayed quiet and worked harder. I almost hadn't been invited to this dinner. That morning, Sharon had called Drew to arrange a family dinner at her estate. She'd specifically said it was for immediate family only, which apparently didn't include me despite 12 years of marriage. Drew had shrugged when I asked why I wasn't mentioned. "She probably just forgot," he'd said, not meeting my eyes. I knew better. Sharon never forgot anything, especially not opportunities to exclude me. I'd insisted on coming, and Drew had reluctantly called his mother back. The silence on the other end of the phone had been telling. "Of course Ava is welcome," Sharon had finally said, her voice tight with disapproval. Now, sitting at her expensive dining table while Kendra mocked my jewelry, I understood exactly why Sharon hadn't wanted me there. This wasn't a family dinner. It was another reminder of my place in their hierarchy. And my place was firmly at the bottom, preferably invisible. My first family dinner with the Whitmores happened 8 years ago, shortly after Drew and I got engaged. I'd been nervous, wanting to make a good impression. I'd worn my best dress and practiced conversation topics in the car. Sharon had greeted me with a tight smile and an immediate assessment. "You're very sweet," she'd said, the word dripping with condescension. "But you're not exactly polished, are you?" Kendra, who was dating someone new every month back then, had laughed. "We always thought Drew would marry someone accomplished. You know, someone with a real career." I'd worked as a software developer at a small tech company, but apparently that didn't count as real in their world. Real careers meant law or medicine or inheriting a family business. Throughout that first dinner, they'd talked over me, ignored my comments, and made inside jokes I couldn't understand. By dessert, I'd realized the truth. I wasn't joining a family. I was an intruder they'd be tolerating for Drew's sake. The necklace had a story they knew nothing about. I'd had it custom-made 6 months ago when my company finally launched publicly. The chain was simple sterling silver, nothing flashy or expensive looking. But the small circular charm hanging from it meant everything to me. On the front, it looked like abstract geometric shapes. Beautiful but unremarkable. On the back, hidden against my skin, was the engraved logo of my software startup, Prism Analytics. I wore it every day, not to show off, but to remind myself why I'd started. Every time someone in Drew's family made me feel small, I touched that charm. Every time Sharon suggested I should focus on being a better wife instead of playing with computers, I felt the metal against my skin. The necklace was my secret armor, my private reminder that I was building something real while they were too busy judging appearances to notice substance. That company was about to change everything. They just didn't know it yet. After Kendra's comment about the necklace, I'd waited for Drew to defend me. He used to do that, years ago when we first married. He'd shut down his mother's subtle insults and change the subject when Kendra got cruel. But that was before. Now he just chuckled awkwardly and touched my arm. "Babe, don't be so sensitive," he said quietly, like I was the problem for being hurt. "Kendra's just joking." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. When had he stopped seeing me? When had I become an embarrassment he had to manage instead of a partner he respected? He used to ask about my work, about the problems I was solving and the code I was writing. Now he barely looked up from his phone when I talked about Prism. The man I'd married had believed in me. This version of Drew seemed to wish I'd just blend into the background and stop trying to be more than his family expected. That was the moment I knew our marriage was over. I just hadn't told him yet. Later that evening, I excused myself to use the bathroom and overheard Kendra in the hallway. She was on her phone, her voice sharp and anxious. I paused just out of sight, listening. "I need that trust fund, Nate," she was saying to her fiancé. "I'm 33 years old. I'm not starting over from zero if this doesn't work out." There was a pause while he responded. Her voice got sharper. "I know you're successful. But I need my own security. This wedding has to happen before my birthday, or the conditions in my grandfather's will change everything." She sounded desperate, almost panicked. The cruel confidence she'd displayed at dinner was completely gone. I realized then that Kendra's constant need to put me down wasn't about me at all. It was about her own fear of losing status, of being the one on the outside looking in. She masked her desperation with cruelty. But understanding her motives didn't make her behavior hurt any less. It just made me more determined to succeed despite her. 3 months earlier, I'd pitched Prism Analytics to a room full of early investors. I'd been terrified but prepared, with detailed projections and a working prototype. I'd sent invitations to everyone I thought might be interested in software that helped small businesses analyze customer data efficiently. One name on that invite list had been Sharon Whitmore. She'd built her reputation on discovering young talent and supporting women in business, at least publicly. I'd thought maybe, just maybe, she'd show up to support her daughter-in-law. She never came. She didn't even respond to the invitation. But another name on that list had shown up, Nate Collins, Kendra's fiancé. He worked in venture capital, and I'd hoped he might see the potential in what I was building. He'd sat in the back, asked a few sharp questions, and left without committing. I'd been disappointed but not surprised. A week later, though, he'd sent an email asking for more information. That had been the first hint that maybe someone in Drew's circle saw value in my work. 2 weeks after my pitch, I'd made the mistake of asking Sharon and Kendra for a small investment over brunch. Drew had encouraged me, thinking his family would want to support us. Sharon had set down her coffee cup with a delicate clink. "Tech is a phase, dear," she'd said, her tone pitying. "Real wealth is built through legacy investments. Real estate, established businesses. Not apps." Kendra had laughed outright. "You'll be broke within a year. 90% of startups fail, you know." Her eyes had gleamed with something close to satisfaction. "I'd hate to see you lose everything." I'd kept my face neutral, thanking them for their time. But inside, I'd felt humiliated and angry. They hadn't even looked at my business plan. They dismissed it based solely on their perception of me as someone who couldn't possibly build something valuable. That night, Kendra had texted me asking for details about Prism. "Maybe I can help," she'd written. But her sudden interest felt wrong. I'd made her sign an NDA before sending any information. She'd laughed at that too. "This is cute," she'd texted back. That NDA would become very important later. 2 weeks after signing the NDA, I discovered Kendra's betrayal. A friend who worked at a competing analytics company called me. "Someone's been shopping around a prototype that looks suspiciously like your pitch," he'd said carefully. "They're claiming it's from a friend, but the details match your demo almost exactly." My stomach had dropped. Only 3 people outside my small team had seen the full prototype, the investors at my pitch, and Kendra. I'd spent that evening tracking down the source. Digital forensics weren't my specialty, but I knew enough to find the screenshots Kendra had taken of my confidential documents. She tried to leak my prototype to a competitor, probably hoping they'd steal the idea and leave me with nothing. She'd been careful, using a burner email account. But she hadn't been careful enough. I had proof of everything. The screenshots with metadata, the emails, the timeline matching perfectly with when I'd shared the NDA-protected information with her. I saved it all in an encrypted folder. Then I did nothing. I didn't confront her. I didn't tell Drew. I just documented everything and waited. 1 month ago, Drew had come home from dinner with his mother and sat me down in our living room. His face had been serious, almost apologetic. "My mom thinks you're distracting me," he'd said carefully. "She's worried that your startup is taking too much of our focus." I'd stared at him. "Our focus? I'm working on my company. You're working at your firm. How am I distracting you?" He'd shifted uncomfortably. "She thinks maybe you should pause the company for a while. Focus on us, on the marriage." The audacity had left me speechless. Sharon wanted me to abandon my dreams because she'd decided they were inconvenient. And Drew was actually considering her opinion. "No," I'd said simply. His jaw had tightened. "Then maybe we're not on the same path anymore." The ultimatum had hung in the air between us. Choose the marriage or choose my company. As if they were mutually exclusive. As if his family's disapproval mattered more than my ambition. That night, I'd started looking for a divorce lawyer. While Drew's family was busy dismissing me, I'd secured real funding. A female venture capitalist named Olivia Torres had attended my pitch and seen exactly what Prism could become. She'd called me 2 days later with an offer. "I've seen 100 pitches this quarter," she'd said. "Yours is the only one solving a real problem with elegant code. Let's talk terms." Within 3 weeks, we'd been fully funded. $50,000 in seed money, with promises of more if we hit our first quarter targets. I'd hired 2 developers, a marketing consultant, and a part-time CFO. We'd moved from beta to full launch in 6 weeks. The software worked beautifully. Small business owners loved how it simplified their customer data analysis. We'd gotten our first 100 paying customers within a month. Then our first 1,000. Kendra had heard whispers of my success through her business networks. Suddenly, after months of mockery, she wanted to grab lunch and talk strategy. Her text had been friendly, almost desperate. "We should collaborate. I could introduce you to people." I'd smiled at my phone and typed back a simple response. "You're under NDA, remember?" Her reply had been immediate. That was just a formality. But it wasn't just a formality, and Kendra was starting to realize she'd made a serious mistake. The power dynamic between us had shifted, and she could feel it. I'd started declining her invitations, ignoring her texts, treating her with the same polite distance she'd shown me for years. At a family birthday party for Drew's father, she'd cornered me in the kitchen. "You're being childish about the NDA," she'd said, trying to sound casual. "I was just trying to help you network." I'd continued arranging appetizers on a serving tray without looking at her. "Help me? Is that what you call trying to leak my prototype to my competitors?" Her face had gone pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," I'd replied calmly, finally meeting her eyes. "I have the screenshots, Kendra. The emails. Everything." She'd opened her mouth, closed it, then tried to laugh it off. "You're being paranoid." I'd picked up the tray and walked past her. "No. I'm being careful. There's a difference." Her smile had vanished. She'd realized, finally, that I wasn't playing anymore. I moved out of Drew's house on a Tuesday afternoon while he was at work. No dramatic confrontation, no crying scene. I just packed my essentials, arranged for movers to get the rest later, and left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "You made your choice. So did I." I'd taken only what was mine, my clothes, my computer, my books, and the necklace I wore every day. Everything else could be divided by lawyers later. I didn't want his family's money or his expensive furniture. I just wanted my freedom. Drew came home that evening to find half the house empty. He called me immediately, his voice panicked. "What are you doing?" Where are you? I'm staying with a friend, I'd replied calmly. You'll hear from my lawyer next week. Ava, we can work this out. Please. But I was done working things out. I was done being the understanding wife who set herself on fire to keep everyone else warm. I was done trying to fit into a family that never wanted me there. It was time to build my own life, my own success, my own happiness. Sharon discovered the consequences of dismissing me 2 weeks later. Her annual charity gala, the biggest event of her social calendar, suddenly lost its largest sponsor. The tech company that had backed her fundraiser for 5 years straight pulled out with barely 48 hours notice. Sharon had called Drew in a panic, and I'd overheard his side of the conversation. Why would they drop out? She demanded. We've had a relationship with them for years. What Sharon didn't know was that the CEO of that tech company, Marcus Chin, was now on my board of advisors. He'd seen my pitch, invested in my company, and asked to mentor me. When he'd heard about how Drew's family had treated me, he'd been furious. That woman uses supporting women in business as a social credential, he'd said. She doesn't actually support anyone but herself. He'd pulled his company sponsorship without telling Sharon why. She'd texted me later that day, "Did you have something to do with this?" I'd read the message and left it on read. Some questions didn't deserve answers. Kendra's engagement fell apart 3 weeks after I moved out. I heard about it through Drew, who'd called me trying to discuss our marriage but had ended up venting about his sister instead. Nate called off the wedding, he'd said, sounding shocked. No warning, no discussion. Just said he couldn't marry someone he didn't trust. I'd stayed silent, letting him talk. Kendra's devastated. She won't tell anyone what happened. I'd known exactly what happened. Nate had finally done his due diligence. He'd asked around about the NDA Kendra had signed, discovered her attempted sabotage, and seen the kind of person he was about to marry. A man who'd built his career on ethical business practices wasn't about to tie himself to someone who stole intellectual property. 2 days after their breakup, Nate had emailed me requesting a meeting. "I owe you an apology," his message had said. "And I'd like to discuss potential investment in Prism, if you're still seeking partners." I'd agreed to meet him. Not because I needed his money anymore, but because watching Kendra's smugness crumble had been satisfying. And Nate deserved to know the truth about what his ex-fiancée had tried to do. The next family brunch happened a month later. I hadn't wanted to go, but Drew had begged me to attend. "We need to talk," he'd said. "Please. Just one last family meal." I'd agreed, mostly curious about how Kendra would handle seeing me now that her life was falling apart. I'd worn the necklace, like always. Kendra had showed up wearing obviously fake designer clothes, her smile fragile around the edges. She tried to act normal, but her hands shook slightly when she reached for her water glass. When she'd noticed my necklace, that old instinct to hurt others before they could hurt her had kicked in. "Still wearing that cheap thing," she'd said, forcing a laugh. But this time, I didn't stay silent. I'd reached up and unclasped the necklace, laying it gently on the table in front of her. Then I'd flipped the charm over, revealing the engraved logo clearly visible in the morning light. "Do you recognize this?" I'd asked calmly. She'd leaned closer, squinting. Then her face had gone completely white. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. Nate walked into the dining room, his eyes going straight to the necklace on the table. Nate had pointed at the logo. "That symbol is why I ended our engagement, Kendra." The table had gone completely silent. Sharon set down her coffee cup. Drew stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Kendra's face had flushed red, then pale, then red again. "You tried to steal from her," Nate continued, his voice hard. "You signed an NDA, took screenshots of confidential information, and tried to sell her ideas to her competitors." Kendra exploded. "She's manipulating everyone," she'd shouted, standing up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "She's making me look bad on purpose. This is all lies." Sharon had turned to me, her expression demanding answers. "What is he talking about? What company?" I'd taken a sip of my coffee, completely calm. "Prism Analytics. The startup I pitched to you and Kendra 8 months ago. The one you said would fail within a year." Recognition had dawned in Sharon's eyes. That was real? Very real, I'd replied. We're profitable, fully funded, and expanding to 3 new markets next quarter. Kendra had continued ranting, but I'd stood up calmly, gathering my things. Nate had followed me out, leaving chaos behind us. Drew started texting constantly after that brunch. Apologies, explanations, desperate pleas for another chance. Let's talk. I was wrong. I see you now. Please come home. His voicemails filled my inbox. Each one more frantic than the last. He'd finally realized what he'd lost, but only after everyone else recognized my value first. I didn't respond to most of his messages. There was nothing left to say. The man I'd married had stopped believing in me years ago. This version of Drew, who suddenly wanted me back now that I was successful, felt like a stranger. Then he'd sent an email asking to buy into Prism Analytics. As an investor and partner, he'd written, "We could work together on this." I'd replied publicly through my company's press release announcing our second round of funding. The list of investors included Olivia's VC firm, Marcus Chen's tech company, and 3 other major players. Drew's name was notably absent. The message was clear: I didn't need him. I didn't need his money or his family's approval. I'd built this without them, and I'd continue growing without them. The fallout in Drew's family was spectacular. Sharon had called an emergency family meeting after learning the full truth about Kendra's sabotage. Apparently, having a daughter who'd committed corporate espionage was bad for her carefully crafted public image. She'd told Kendra she was disowned, "Until you fix this PR mess and prove you can behave like a Whitmore." Kendra had spiraled. Mutual friends told me she'd been calling everyone in her contact list, trying to explain away what had happened. Nobody was buying it. 2 weeks later, she'd called me from an unknown number. I'd answered out of curiosity. She'd been crying. "I didn't know you were serious," she'd sobbed. "I thought it was just another one of your little hobbies. I didn't think it would actually work." "That's the problem," I'd replied calmly. "You never thought I was capable of anything real." "I'm sorry," she'd whispered. "Please. I need your help. Everything's falling apart." I'd hung up and blocked the number immediately. Her apology wasn't about genuine remorse. It was about consequences catching up to her. Some bridges, once burned, weren't worth rebuilding. 6 months after leaving Drew, I walked into my company's quarterly investor meeting wearing a tailored navy suit and the necklace I never took off. My hair was styled professionally, my presentation rehearsed but natural. This wasn't the uncertain woman who'd been mocked at family dinners. This was the CEO I'd become. The board members stood when I entered the room. We'd exceeded every target for the quarter. Revenue was up 40%. Customer retention was at 93%. 3 major corporations had approached us about acquisition offers, all of which I declined. Prism was growing on its own terms. After the meeting, Olivia had pulled me aside. "You should be proud," she'd said. "You've built something remarkable." I'd smiled, touching the charm around my neck. "I'm just getting started." Back in my office, I'd had the necklace photographed and framed. It hung on the wall behind my desk now, a reminder of where I'd started and how far I'd come. Every person who'd doubted me, every insult I'd endured, every moment I'd been made to feel worthless had been fuel for this success. The final twist came 3 months later. Sharon's father, the wealthy patriarch of the Whitmore family, passed away after a long illness. His death had been expected, but the reading of his will had shocked everyone. I'd learned about it through a stunned email from Drew. His grandfather had left a substantial portion of his estate, including controlling interest in several family businesses, to the woman who proved herself worthy through her own merit, not through marriage or inheritance. That woman was me. Apparently, Sharon's father had attended my investor pitch 8 months ago. He'd sat in the back row wearing regular clothes instead of his usual expensive suits. I'd never recognized him. He'd watched my presentation, reviewed my business plan, and contacted me privately a week later. We'd met for coffee several times over the following months. He'd been impressed by my work ethic, my vision, and my refusal to give up despite his daughter's dismissal. "You remind me of myself at your age," he'd told me. Building something from nothing, proving the skeptics wrong. He'd invested quietly in Prism under a family trust name I hadn't connected to the Whitmores. And in his will, he'd left me everything Sharon had expected to inherit. The will reading had been brutal for Sharon and Kendra. They'd both expected to split the patriarch's fortune. Instead, they'd received small trust funds with strict conditions. The bulk of his wealth, including his controlling business interests, had gone to me. Sharon had tried to contest the will, but her father had been thorough. He'd recorded video testimony explaining his decision, had it witnessed by 3 attorneys, and left detailed documentation of his mental competency. "I'm leaving my legacy to someone who will build on it," he'd said in the video. "Not someone who will simply spend it." Drew had called me after the reading, his voice hollow. "Did you know about this?" I knew he'd invested, I'd replied honestly. "I didn't know about the will. My mother is destroying her home office," he'd said. "Kendra won't stop crying. They're saying you manipulated him." I'd felt no satisfaction in their pain, but no guilt either. I hadn't manipulated anyone. I'd simply built something real while they'd been busy judging me. The old man had recognized that and made his choice accordingly. His family's anger wasn't my problem anymore. Drew had showed up at Prism's official launch event 6 weeks later. The celebration was held at an upscale hotel, with press coverage and industry leaders in attendance. I'd been moving through the crowd, shaking hands and answering questions, when I'd spotted him near the entrance. He'd looked older somehow, worn down by everything that had happened. When he'd approached me, his expression had been hopeful but cautious. "Can we talk?" he'd asked quietly. I'd looked at him for a long moment. This man had been my partner for 12 years. We'd built a life together, made promises, shared dreams. But he'd also chosen his family's approval over my ambitions. He'd sat silent while they mocked me. He'd asked me to give up everything I'd worked for to make them comfortable. I'd shaken his hand formally, like he was any other guest at my event. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Drew." His face had fallen. "That's it? We're done." "We've been done for a long time," I'd replied gently. "You just didn't notice." I'd walked away toward a group of reporters waiting to interview me, cameras flashing. Behind me, Drew had stood alone in the crowded room. 3 months later, I sat on a panel at a conference for female founders. The ballroom was packed with ambitious women who were building their own companies against all odds. The moderator, a successful entrepreneur herself, asked her final question: "What's your proudest symbol of success?" Not money or metrics, but something personal. I'd smiled and touched the necklace I still wore every day. "This necklace cost me $45 to make," I'd said. When my sister-in-law first saw it, she mocked it as something from a clearance rack. Cheap. Worthless. Not good enough for their family. I'd pulled the charm forward, showing the room the logo engraved on the back. "This is my company logo. This necklace represents every late night I spent coding, every doubt I pushed through, every person who said I'd fail." They thought it was worthless because they couldn't see past the surface. The room had gone quiet, every woman listening intently. "The lesson isn't about proving anyone wrong," I'd continued. "It's about knowing your own worth, even when nobody else does. Especially when nobody else does. Because the value isn't in what others see. It's in what you build." I'd ended with the words I now lived by: "Know your worth. Then wear it like armor."